Welcome back to The Factor. I'm having this wonderful conversation with Captain Gerry Gouveia. We know him better as Gerry. Gerry, you have so many hats that you wear. You were former president of the Private Sector Commission, still a leader in the Private Sector Commission. You're the chairman of the Governance and Security Subcommittee of the Private Sector Commission. You're on the sentencing board, as you mentioned. Of course, you run your company. You were former president of the Tourism and Hospitality Association of Guyana. Where do you find the time to do all of these things? And then you told me that you spend 60% of your time away from your company. How do you find the time to do all of this?
Wonderful, hard-working staff, and they're just phenomenal. They're dedicated, they're committed, and very, very enthusiastic about what we do at Roraima Airways.
So this 60% of your time is spent doing what? You're away from your company. You're spent doing things like this, trying to promote Guyana and trying to work for the
promote Guyana, work with the private sector. You know, for example, the Rupununi Chamber of Commerce. I'm the one who went out there and brought the private sector, and this is maybe 8-9 years ago, brought the private sector, the Rupununi together, sat down there, spoke to them about the virtues of the private sector and how they could form themselves together, and sat there with them and formed the Rupununi Chamber of Commerce. So I was in the midst of that, and we did that all across the country. And I would go out to Essequibo Coast to speak with the private sector, Berbice, Keldon, and then we are in constant meetings dealing with our own members in terms of problems that they may face in the private sector, meeting with government officials, meeting with the opposition.
Sorry, I know our time is a bit short in this segment. Do you enjoy doing all of this?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I forgot to mention, and by your uniform should have reminded me, that you also fly.
Yes,
you don't just sit in the office. You fly the aircraft.
Well, you know, I was saying to you, I've been a pilot for 35 years, and for 35 years, every 6 months, my life as a pilot, every 6 months, you do a medical examination that is completely intrusive to your body, physically and your fluids and everything else, and then every 6 months you also go through a very detailed flight examination with another pilot who will take you up into the planes. And you do all the things that you have to do, the emergencies, and they test you. And so for 35 years, that is what we also live with.
All right. As a pilot, you're a former captain in the Army, and in 1978, you had to do some flights in and out of Johnstown, from Timeri to Johnstown and various parts of the country. We don't have time to go through all of the experiences that you would have had, but you did tell me some stories that would stand out. And I've seen over the years, I would see CNN coming in, ABC coming in, just to do that bit, and they head back, and we see that every time November comes around. When you look back, I'm trying to figure out, that will be 34 years. The
last time you and I did it was 25 years.
Was 25, so it was 9 years ago,
yes.
Right? This is 34 years. What stands out when you look back?
You know, you said it was a negative episode. I actually see it as a sad, I don't see it as negative, I see it as a sad episode. And I say that because I think that it really shows you the danger of power and how power corrupts one man. And actually the sign behind Jim Jones' head that said, "Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it." And I think Jonestown is a lesson to the world. And Guyana got a responsibility to the world to keep the memory of Jonestown alive, to prevent people from cultivating and supporting maximum leaders who could lead them over that cliff. Like we saw in history, we saw after Johnson, you had Waco, Texas. So you had people continue to do this.
But some would say, why would you want to commemorate something that is sad and negative and everything
because
else?
Of the lessons to mankind. Guyana got a responsibility to mankind. That is not it is not a negative to Guyana. A lot of Guyanese, because they looked at it like that. Actually, Jonestown was an amazing experiment in human endeavor, in going out into that jungle in the early stages. I mean, those people create a little city in the middle of that jungle, clean it up, you know, put in roads and schools and buildings. You went there with me in the early stages, and it was amazing. It was only after Jim Jones came here, and then they built it for 600 or 700 people, and then he came with another 700 people and overloaded it, and then he came with his own problems and destroyed it. But the truth of the matter is, it also demonstrated resilience by people, by ordinary people who had a dream to live in a kind of utopia. And they worked hard. I saw them when Johnson was alive. The point is that we as a country need to build a proper memorial. We need to be able to encourage families and historians to come back to Johnstown. And people say it's dark tourism. It's not dark tourism. It's historical tourism, and it's also a lesson for mankind that we must not allow the memory of Jonestown and what happened at Jonestown. We must not forget it, because it could happen again.
But some in society are saying just that. Let's forget it. Let's close that chapter.
Again, I don't think it's people who thought it through enough. And even for Guyana, you know, the people at Port Kaituma, they went through the closure of the manganese mine, and then they went into an economic slump. And then they went through the issue of Jonestown, and when Jonestown happened, they went through another economic slump, and then Barama went in, and now they're in mining. You imagine if we did a proper memorial there at Jonestown, and we are able to allow families and friends and historians to come and visit Jonestown in a way that is convenient. What it will do to the little town of Jonestown, Port Kaituma, with hotels and restaurants and people who, transportation services and so on. While it is important for Jonestown to be a memorial, it is also important for Port Kaituma, who actually suffered. And I think it's time that we start to contribute to modernizing that area and making Jonestown accessible to the historians and families.
Is this something that Gerry Gouveia will be putting some effort into to see at some point that maybe this can be materialized?
Unfortunately, Gerry Gouveia wrote the government maybe 15 years ago, I think twice. And unfortunately, I don't think the government pays enough attention to it. And for some reason, I believe too there's a lot of misunderstanding and about Jonestown, and so the government have not really prioritized it, and they really should. They really should do it. And
well, let's look at a new dispensation.
Yes,
and it's
really
down the road. Is this something that Gerry would want to revive?
It is possible, but I am also, as times move on, we are looking at different angles. Wakenham, I just spent the last weekend in Wakenham. Wakenham is an amazing island, amazing people, and I have my eyes on Wakenham as a place to expand my tourism business. It's amazing. Wakenham and Legwan are two amazing islands.
So there's something down the road the lovely people from Wakenham and Legwan can expect.
I went there, and they were lovely people, and I enjoyed it, and I am seriously
almost every year you interact with international news agencies coming in for the same purpose. But we don't hear much about Guyana per se. They just come and do what they have to do and show that. Do you think that the fact that they're coming here and they're doing that, they have in some way, some kind of an obligation in some way to talk a bit about our country?
I don't think they have an obligation. I think we have to create the incentives to them to do that. And because, we have been negligent in terms of what we did to Jonestown. We should really make Jonestown into something that will help create the interest and create the news. By just leaving it there and allowing the jungle to just take it over, we are doing an injustice to ourselves and to the memory of the people who died there. So when the news agency come and they look at Jonestown the way it is, they just do it and leave.
All right, before we go, I remember there are so many stories you told me. 32 years after, you told me when you were there 32 years ago and you got in there and you saw the bodies lying there, and I recall you telling me about the stench that you had to deal with, but you had to get those people out, those who survived, and their bodies had to be airlifted, and whole long story. Maybe a lot of people who are 32 today probably would not remember those images. When you look back, when you go back there every year, forget about the memorial and about the city that they built and everything else. What comes to your mind in your quiet moment when you stand there? What comes to your mind?
Actually, I knew a lot of the young people who died, and I remember standing amongst them the Monday morning and walking among the bodies, and I was thinking it was surreal. You knew that this was significant, but you never really, as a young man, I was in my early 20s, and so I never really grasped at that time the magnitude of what I was standing in between. And even the Saturday morning or the Sunday morning when I was flying the congressman's body out, and the congresswoman who was wounded, who is now a congresswoman, and she's now the congresswoman, but she was wounded. She was the secretary of the congressman, and she was wounded, and I flew her back to Timeri. And I had no idea of the significance. But so I stand there sometimes and I reflect on it, and it's really surreal. And in the quiet moments you think about the people who died and how they died and what were they following,
You told me a story, and I want to close with that. You told me a story when we were there, and it gave me goosebumps, and it still gives me goosebumps still as I tell all the people this story. the story about the daisies, the bedded daisies.
Well, it's
in
quite,
that
it's quite,
part.
actually quite, even when you go there now, you see it. You see, remember we went and we found the piano,
Yeah.
the organ, but where the pavilion was, where the bodies actually fell when they drank, when they went and lied on the ground with their children, where those bodies were, outside of that area, the jungle is taking it back over. Where the bodies are, they're only daisies. I mean, and it's, they're photographic evidence of what we are seeing. And I don't know, maybe some agriculturists maybe, or somebody will be able to explain to us, why is it the rest of the jungle took over everything else, but where that pavilion was and where those bodies were, they're only daisies.
And maybe some poet may want to put words to that. Flowers bloom, whatever, whatever. I don't know. I'm not a poet.
But you have to give me this opportunity to say it to you about Roraima and my staff. I want to take 2 minutes to say it to you. You know, when I started Roraima back in 1992, and recognizing that Guyana was moving from a product-driven to a service-oriented country, and I projected into the future. And so when we started the small airline, Roraima Airways, and then we started the ground handling operation at the airport and built the hotels. Somebody was asking me the other day about it and said, you know, how did you conceptualize it? And basically today, when you look at Roraima today, it is one of the most, there's a lot of vertical integration and synergies, and there's no other company in the Caribbean that got the vertical and integration and cross-fertilization like Roraima Airways. So for example, from the time you arrive at the airport, we will meet you, greet you, put you into our air-conditioned buses, bring you into our hotel where you'll sleep, you'll eat, put you into our planes, we'll fly you to your business, your mine sites, wherever else. In tourism, we'll take you to Kaitro Falls, put you in our boats, take you to our resort. We will reconfirm your international ticketing. And when you're going back to the airport, you're going to be checking in at our check-in counter on Delta Airlines or Suriname Airways, and then you're going to be sitting in our executive lounge before you're leaving the country. And
it's a complete package.
It took us 17 years to put the pieces together. And basically what it was anticipating where Guyana was going to be in 20 years and preparing for it. And today
so you're prepared for the Marriott?
Absolutely.
Fully prepared?
We are prepared for the development of Guyana. And we are here ready, and we have been serving the purpose. It's been amazing. You know, investors will come in and they will bring their delegations, whether it's mining and we will put them through that service, the entire thing, so and it works like
exciting times are ahead.
Absolutely.
Quickly though, in 30 seconds, you mentioned you rode the government 15 years ago, but Johnston happened within the last administration. There would have been at least maybe 14 years before the other government took over.
Yeah.
Did you mention within those 14 years to the previous administration that maybe
no,
there was some
because
potential
remember
there?
during that time I was also a very junior.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people sometimes look at me today and think, remember I was a young man in those days. I was the bottom of the food chain. My elevation in terms of business and started in the private sector, and so while I became the chief pilot of the Army, but I was still a junior part of that process.
And when I look at the date, you did start your company in 1992.
1992.
Thank you very much, Gerry, for taking time out and being here on The Factor. Part of the 60% of the time you're away from the company. So I got a bit of that here on The Factor. I want to wish you all the best. Congratulations. That's all we have for you on The Factor today. Of course, my guest was Captain Gerry Gouveia. We call him Gerry. Well, Gerald Gouveia, we call him Gerry. So many things I can introduce him by. I'm just going to say it true Guyanese. Nia Suban saying so long until next time.